General Hospital will reveal Sasha stepped into the heavy room with torment etched deeply into her eyes, her face pale as if she had just emerged from a nightmare. She could no longer pretend, could no longer let the darkness drag on for even one more second. The guilt had been eating away at her, invading every cell of her being, making each breath feel like a burden. While Jason was focused on listening to Willow's tearful plea for help, Sasha knew she had to interrupt, had to shatter the fragile moment with a brutal truth. A truth she knew would shake Jason's faith to its core and threaten to destroy everything Willow was desperately trying to protect. There was no more room for evasion, no time left for delay. Sasha looked Jason straight in the eye, the man she once believed would never forgive her, and delivered her confession like ice-cold steel. She had never been pregnant with Michael's child. The story of that child, the fake tears, the promises, the carefully constructed grief. It had all been a facade masking a far darker reality. That child was the product of a reckless, regrettable affair with a stranger. A moment of weakness. A mistake she had buried to preserve her image, her dignity, and most importantly, the thin thread that still tied her to Michael. Jason froze. There was no outburst of anger, no shouted accusations, only a haunting silence. He looked at Sasha as though he had never truly known her. Every action she had taken, every tear she had cried, every time she had begged for forgiveness, suddenly, it all meant nothing. Sasha's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a direct blow to the fragile trust that held together a family already riddled with cracks. It was a deep gash in the already fractured relationships between Michael, Willow, Carly, and now, Jason himself. Willow stood in stunned disbelief. At first, she didn't understand why Jason's expression had changed so drastically, why his posture had stiffened. But when Sasha timidly repeated her confession, this time directed at Willow, her heart broke into pieces. Every plan she had been clinging to with every ounce of strength, from begging Jason to mediate peace with Carly, to her desperate attempt to reverse the guardianship agreement with Drew, was rendered meaningless by those few devastating words. She didn't know whether to feel angry or devastated. Part of her wanted to scream at Sasha, to rage at her for manipulating Michael using the life of a child that never existed. But another part felt pity. Sasha, too, was a victim of her own string of poor decisions, just like Willow herself. Jason turned away slightly, trying to hide the storm brewing in his chest. He knew he couldn't expose Sasha now, not when Willow needed him more than ever. But he also knew this secret couldn't stay buried forever. Sooner or later, it would come to light. And when it did, the fallout would be unlike anything they had ever faced. Meanwhile, Willow's world descended into utter chaos. Her mind was torn in two, on one side, reeling from the shocking truth Sasha had revealed, and on the other, gripped by paralyzing fear for her children's future. She couldn't erase the guilt of signing the guardianship papers that handed her kids over to Drew, what now seemed like a fatal mistake. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Carly's face, furious, unyielding, like a storm poised to destroy everything Willow had left. Willow hadn't come to Jason to be blindsided by Sasha's confession. She had come searching for one final chance, a faint glimmer of hope that Jason might intervene and help her untangle the mess strangling her family. She believed in him because he had always been the one person who could make Carly listen, the one man Drew still respected, the only individual with the clarity and calm to stop this from becoming a full-blown war. But now, with Sasha's truth hanging in the air like a blade poised to fall, Willow couldn't help but wonder, was Jason still capable of being the mediator they all needed? As Sasha left, leaving behind a quake that had yet to erupt, Willow turned to Jason again, this time not with pleading eyes, but with a gaze filled with pain and uncertainty. She no longer knew what to believe, about her children's future, about what would happen if Michael learned the truth, or about herself, the woman who was slowly losing everything because of one misguided choice after another. Jason felt it all, the tension, the weight, the crushing pressure of secrets and loyalties colliding. He was being pulled into a vortex of crisis, one woven with silence, betrayal, and dangerously unmet expectations. Willow needed saving, but Jason knew that rescuing her might come at the cost of pulling himself into the same downward spiral. And as if that weren't enough, Carly was already sensing betrayal. The more Jason stood with Willow, the more Carly began to believe he was turning his back on Michael, and on her. Jason was stunned into silence, completely paralyzed by the weight of the confession Sasha had just thrown into the air. For a man like him, who had been through countless life-and-death battles, who had watched allies fall before his eyes, and who had faced betrayal from those closest to him, very little could truly shock him. But Sasha's words, they were unlike anything he had ever encountered. They didn't come in the form of gunfire, bloodshed, or threats, but as a long-buried truth, now unleashed like a ticking time bomb in the heart of the people he cared about most. In Jason's mind, everything he thought he knew about Sasha, the woman who once stood as a pillar of strength for Michael in his darkest hours, crumbled to ash. He had believed she'd changed, believed she'd overcome her addictions and truly become part of the fragile peace Michael had built after so much loss. But now, it was all a lie. She hadn't just betrayed Michael, she had weaponized a child, a non-existent child, to manipulate his emotions. That, to Jason, was beyond forgiveness. But what suffocated him more was the fallout that would come if this truth ever reached Michael. He knew Michael well, he knew how vulnerable his heart was, especially after everything he had endured, the death of his former wife, failures, and the heavy weight of bearing the Corinthos name. If Michael found out the child wasn't his, that Sasha had deceived him from the start, it could break him beyond repair. And this time, there might be no one to save him. Jason couldn't let that happen. He couldn't lose Michael, someone who was like a younger brother, like family, just because the truth came too late. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore what Sasha had revealed. He was being torn between duty and loyalty, between doing what was right and protecting those who didn't deserve more pain. Willow, sitting just a few feet away, watched Jason with growing concern. She sensed something had changed, something deep and irreversible. She saw his widened eyes, his clenched fists, but no words came. The empathy she'd hoped to find in his gaze was now replaced with a distant stare, full of conflict. She wanted to ask what was wrong, but before she could speak, Sasha had already stepped back toward the door. No farewell, no explanation. She left as quickly as she'd arrived, leaving behind only a faint trace of perfume and a tremor in the air that had yet to erupt. The door clicked shut softly, but to Willow, it sounded like a resounding slam, marking the end of something vital. She turned to Jason, now with pleading eyes, not only seeking help, but desperate for reassurance. Yet Jason remained silent, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the room, lost in the past. Where memories of Michael, Carly, and the countless difficult decisions he'd made to protect his family all came crashing back. He couldn't foresee what would happen if this truth was exposed. He couldn't guess Carly's reaction, the woman who would go to war for her son, who would explode if she learned Sasha had not only deceived Michael, but also made a mockery of the Corinthos family, something Carly held sacred above all else. Willow knew something serious had just unfolded. She felt like she was being pushed out of the center of the story, no longer the one begging for help, but now a bystander to a far more dangerous storm. She worried for Jason, but even more for Michael, for Wiley, for Amelia. She felt the future slipping out of her grasp, and all she could do was watch helplessly. Meanwhile, Jason, though physically still in that quiet room, was spiraling internally, caught in a whirlwind of possibilities and moral dilemmas. What should he do with this truth? Should he protect Michael by staying silent, or free him from a toxic relationship by exposing Sasha? And if he chose truth, would Willow, so desperate for his support, still see him as her ally? Would Carly ever forgive him? Could this already fragile family endure yet another devastating blow? Sasha had left the room, but the echo of her confession rang loud in Jason's heart, like a warning bell, signaling that the real storm was only just beginning. Jason understood all too well that he now stood at the breaking point between two irreconcilable forces, on one side, the harsh, undeniable truth that could destroy everything if exposed, on the other, his responsibility to protect, not just one person, but an entire network of people already entangled in grief, deception, and vulnerability. But this time, unlike so many before, he couldn't simply pick a side and hold the line. Jason knew that any singular choice now would bring collapse. There were no clear paths left, no one who was entirely right or entirely wrong, only a chaotic storm demanding clarity, resolve, and a kind of compassion that defied conventional morality. Willow remained seated, her wide eyes filled with a quiet terror. She had no idea what had just transpired between Jason and Sasha, but she knew one thing with certainty: Jason was the only person who could pull her back from the edge of the abyss she'd wandered into. She had jeopardized the peace of her children by agreeing to a legal guardianship with Drew, a decision that now felt more like a trap than a safeguard. And now, as everything hovered on the brink of implosion, she needed someone who could not only help her negotiate but who could diffuse the lit fuse between her and Carly, a woman who, once pushed too far, could become utterly unforgiving. Jason looked at Willow and saw in her the reflection of countless people he had once saved. People backed into a corner with no way out, who still held on to the fragile hope that he wouldn't abandon them. But this time, he wasn't just a friend, he was the gatekeeper of a truth too heavy to carry alone, the only person who could decide whether this family could still be saved, or if it would be consumed by secrets, resentment, and years of unchecked lies. Though he said nothing, a silent war was raging within him. Meanwhile, Carly, on the other side of the emotional battlefield, was sinking into a completely different state of mind. Her disappointment was quickly morphing into anger. She had always believed Jason was the one person who would never betray the family, the one who would always put Michael above everything else. But now, watching him stand beside Willow, the woman Carly believed unworthy of raising Michael's children, the woman she blamed for so much of his past pain, was nothing short of betrayal. Carly knew nothing about Sasha's horrific secret, but Jason's lack of transparency, his quiet alignment with Willow while seemingly ignoring Michael's side, felt like a knife to the back. In Carly's world, everything was black and white, you were either loyal or you weren't. There was no room for hesitation, no moral gray areas for compromise. And with the icy glare she now cast toward Jason, it was clear that, in her mind, he had chosen the wrong side. Jason could feel the cracks spreading, not just in the relationships around him, but in the trust that had once formed the foundation of everything he protected. He knew that if he didn't act soon, it would all fall apart. But what action could he take? Protecting Willow meant continuing to bury Sasha's secret, lying to Michael yet again. Exposing the truth meant tearing open old wounds and possibly breaking Michael for good. Pleasing Carly might mean pushing Willow and her children into the hands of someone she no longer trusted. Jason's choice was no longer about right or wrong, it was about choosing the least devastating path among a field of inevitable damage. He had to find a third way, a path that could preserve what little good remained in this fractured family. But time was running out. The things left unsaid were swelling in the shadows, and if Jason didn't move soon, his silence would become the final blow that destroyed everything. The internal war between Jason, Carly, Drew, and Willow had long since moved past sharp words and heated arguments. What was once a tangled exchange of conflicting opinions had now evolved into a high-stakes psychological battleground, one filled with emotional landmines, unhealed scars, and a growing inventory of secrets threatening to detonate at any moment. No longer was this a dispute over principles or parenting philosophies. This was a chess match played on the shattered remnants of trust, where each move could bring salvation or total ruin. Jason stood at the center of this volatile storm, burdened not only by the knowledge he carried but by the expectations placed upon him by every side. He was no stranger to pressure, but this was different. This was personal. Deeply personal. Every face involved, Willow, Carly, Drew, even Michael in absentia, meant something to him. Each represented a part of the family he had spent his entire adult life protecting. And now, as that very family splintered from within, Jason was being asked, no, forced, to become the arbiter of impossible choices. Willow, fragile yet resolute, remained the quiet epicenter of the unfolding chaos. Her desperation had led her to Jason with the hope that he might help her undo what she now saw as a terrible mistake, signing away the guardianship of her children to Drew. But as she sat there, unaware of the ticking time bomb that Sasha had just dropped in Jason's lap, she became another piece on the board. One that needed to be protected, one that could easily become collateral damage in the brewing war. Sasha, for her part, had retreated, but not without leaving behind a truth that had the power to shatter the already crumbling foundation of trust in the Corinthos circle. Her revelation, that the child she once claimed was Michael's was actually fathered by another man, wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a seismic threat to the emotional equilibrium of everyone involved. Jason had yet to process what to do with that information, but he knew one thing for certain: it wouldn't stay buried for long. The moment Sasha cracked under the weight of her guilt or someone else connected the dots, it would be over. The detonation would be swift, merciless, and far-reaching. Meanwhile, Carly was preparing for war in her own way. Always fierce in the face of betrayal, always unrelenting when it came to protecting her son, she had begun to see Jason's neutrality. Or worse, his quiet support of Willow, as a direct betrayal. Carly didn't need to know about Sasha's lie to feel that the world around her was shifting in dangerous directions. For her, Jason was choosing the wrong battles, standing in the wrong corners, and forgetting where his true loyalties were supposed to lie. And when Carly felt betrayed, she didn't retreat, she attacked. But perhaps the most dangerous player in this twisted game was Drew. Once calm and calculating, he had begun to reveal a side of himself driven not only by the desire to protect Willow and the children but by a deeper, darker need to assert control. His insistence on maintaining guardianship had morphed into something rigid, almost obsessive. Jason could sense the shift, could see the fire in Drew's eyes. This wasn't just about protecting the kids anymore. This was about power, legacy, and retribution. Drew wasn't going to back down. In fact, he was preparing to make a move so definitive, so irreversible, that it would force everyone else to follow his lead, or be crushed in the aftermath. Jason knew time was running out. The storm clouds were gathering faster than he could contain them. Willow was waiting, hoping he would step in before she lost everything. Sasha had already lit the fuse, and her secret could explode at any moment. Carly was coiled like a viper, ready to strike the instant she felt cornered. And Drew. Drew was the wild card, the one who might deliver the final blow that would pierce the already fragile heart of the Corinthos family. There was no more room for hesitation. Jason had always been the man others turned to in times of crisis, the enforcer, the protector, the man who handled the dark so others could live in the light. But this time, the darkness wasn't coming from outside forces. It was born from within, from loyalty turned brittle, from love twisted by fear, from secrets kept for too long. And unless Jason found a way to neutralize the threat before it reached its tipping point, he would bear witness not just to the fall of a family, but to the emotional ruin of everyone he cared about.